The wind tore across the plains like it had somewhere to be. Dust danced in spirals, dry as old bones, sweeping through the brittle grass and rattling the loose boards of the Boone Ranch. The sun, a white disk in a cloudless sky, beat down on the land until everything seemed to shimmer with thirst. The pigs were the only ones who didn't seem to mind, rooting in their pen beside the barn, their snorts lazy and wet in the heavy stillness. It was Billings who saw her first. "Hey!" he shouted, dropping a pail of slop as if it had bit him. "Hey, get out of there!" She froze, hunched low near the trough, a bruised apple halfway to her mouth. Dirt streaked her cheeks. Her dress, or what was left of it, hung off her frame like it belonged to someone else. She looked no older than 20, though hardship and sun had etched her face with shadows that didn't match her years. The apple slipped from her fingers, landing with a dull thud in the mud. Billings climbed the fence with fury in his boots. "You got a death wish, girl. That slop's for the hogs, not beggars and buzzards." She didn't answer, just backed away slowly, hands held low and open. Her eyes flicked from the man to the open land beyond the ranch, calculating the sprint, the odds. She wouldn't have made it. Hank came around the corner with his rifle in hand. "Caught her eating, huh?" he said, squinting under the brim of his hat. "Probably full of lice. Probably stole from the Martins last month, too." "Probably," Billings said. She was gnawing on pig scraps. The girl's voice was dry as stone. "Wasn't gnawing, just smelling. That's all." That only made Billings angrier. "Smelling. You lying, little." "She hungry," a voice called from the porch. The ranch hands turned. Silas Boone stood at the edge of the wooden steps, a glass of water in one hand, his other resting casually on his belt. His hair was gray and sun-bleached, skin like cured leather, but he moved like a man who hadn't yet surrendered to the years. He didn't look at the girl. He looked at the sky. "Sure is a hot one," he said. Then, finally, he looked down at her. "What's your name?" She didn't answer. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously, shoulders tense. Silas nodded slowly. "No matter. Come here." The girl stayed frozen, halfway between the trough and the fence. Billings stepped forward, but Silas gave a single shake of his head. "Come here," Silas said again, more gently. "You thirsty?" She licked her cracked lips. Her hands trembled slightly. "Come on. You ain't a rabbit, and this ain't a trap." She took a step forward, then another, until she stood below the porch, arms wrapped around her middle like she was trying to keep herself from falling apart. Silas handed her the water. She drank it like it was the first time her throat had worked in days. Silas waited until she finished. Then he said, soft but firm, "You'll eat like a queen now." Billings sputtered. "Silas, she was eating pig slop." "She was starving. That's what she was," Silas replied, not unkindly. "Wouldn't you eat anything if it meant you didn't die today? She's probably trouble. She's probably human." The girl wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Her fingers were raw, nails cracked, and the way she looked at Silas, like she didn't understand what he was or what he wanted, made his chest ache. "You got a name?" he asked again. After a moment, she whispered, "Liza May." "Well, Miss Liza May," he said, "you come on inside and get yourself some real food." The girl didn't move, not right away. She looked past him to the open door, and then behind her to the fence, as if weighing two different kinds of danger. Finally, with the smallest nod, she stepped up the porch and disappeared inside. Silas turned to Billings and Hank. "She's not a thief. She's not an outlaw. She's just hungry. That's all." Billings grunted. "Still smells like trouble." "Then wash your damn hands before supper," Silas muttered and went inside. The house was cooler, though not by much. Liza stood near the threshold, hesitant, watching the worn furniture and dusty windows like they might turn on her. Silas moved to the cupboard, pulled down a tin of beans and a loaf of dry bread, and set them on the table. "Sit," she did cautiously. "You hiding anywhere?" he asked, setting a plate down in front of her. She shook her head, but she held her side like it ached. Silas didn't press. Instead, he poured 2 cups of coffee, bitter and strong. She didn't touch hers. She ate the bread slow, chewing each bite as if it might vanish if she moved too fast. He watched her in silence. After a while, she spoke without looking up. They chased me out of Broken Hollow 3 nights back. Said I was bad luck. Said I had the devil in me. Silas raised an eyebrow. Do you? She glanced up sharply, a flicker of something wild behind her eyes. No, she said, then added quieter. But I seen men who do. He nodded. That was enough. She finished eating, but she didn't ask for more. Silas didn't offer. Instead, he lit a lamp and stood in the doorway, watching the horizon. The wind had picked up again, whispering across the prairie like a warning. You can sleep in the loft tonight, he said. There's blankets up there. Liza turned her head slightly. Why were you helping me? Silas didn't answer right away. He rubbed his thumb across a scar on his forearm, then said, Years back, my boy brought home a coyote pup with a busted leg. Everyone said it was a bad idea. Thing would grow up mean, tear up the chickens, maybe even bite him one day. What happened? He nursed it, fed it, carried it around in his coat, till it could walk again. She stared at him. Did it bite him? No, never did. He looked at her then, full and hard. Sometimes what folks call wild is just wounded. She didn't reply, just stood and took the stairs to the loft slowly, as if her bones didn't trust the quiet. Silas watched her until she disappeared. Then he closed the door, set the latch, and sat down in the chair by the hearth. He stared into the cold ashes, listening to the old wood groan in the wind. He didn't know her story. Didn't need to, not yet. But there was something in her eyes that burned, something that reminded him of the way his son used to look at storm clouds on the horizon. Not afraid, just waiting. Outside, coyotes howled in the distance. Inside, a silence settled, heavy and old. And for the first time in a long while, the Boone Ranch felt less empty. The first time Liza stepped into the washroom behind the barn, she flinched at her reflection in the cracked mirror above the basin. The woman staring back looked hollow and sunburned, ribs too sharp beneath too loose skin, her hair a matted tangle of dusk and dirt. She didn't recognize herself. Not really. The water in the basin was lukewarm, but it might as well have been sacred. She stripped slowly, quietly, washing layer after layer of dust and shame away until the gray water ran thick and still. That night, wrapped in a wool blanket beneath the slanted beams of the loft, she listened to the wind creak through the boards and tried to remember the last time she'd slept in a bed without fear. Every sound outside still made her flinch. Wind against the barn roof, coyotes in the hills. But the mattress beneath her was solid, warm from her own breath. Eventually, she drifted off. The next morning, she was up before dawn. Silas found her kneeling by the milking stall, sleeves rolled and eyes focused. The cow was patient, more than most men, and Liza's hands moved with surprising calm. She didn't look up when he entered the barn. You ever milk a cow before? No, she said, but I watched a lot. He studied her for a long beat. You watched real close. That earned the smallest smile from her, one he pretended not to notice. She was a fast learner. By week's end, she was fixing fence rails, mending tack, and cleaning the saddle room with quiet precision. The bruises under her eyes faded. The limp she'd walked in with softened until it was nearly gone. She still didn't talk much, not about her past, not about the jagged pink scar on the inside of her left forearm. But she worked like she belonged. Silas kept his distance at first, not out of suspicion. He had already decided she wasn't dangerous, but out of respect for silence. He understood silence better than most. Evenings found them sitting on the porch, coffee cups between them, watching the sky bruise into violet and gold. Liza would sometimes hum, low and tuneless, like she was testing if the world still let music exist. And Silas, though he said little, began to find himself waiting for her voice in the quiet. One night, when the wind died and the coyote stayed silent, he told her about Mary. My wife, he said simply. She was always cold, even in summer. Doc said it was something with the blood. Took her slow. Liza didn't interrupt. Her hands were wrapped around her coffee cup, knuckles pale. Buried her under the cottonwood tree, just east of the pasture. She nodded once. I seen the marker. Silas stared at the darkness past the porch. My son rode off not long after. Said he'd join up with some lawmen hunting the Dalton gang. That was 8 years ago. Liza turned her head slowly toward him. Did he ever come back? Silas didn't answer, not directly. Found his hat once, near an old trail camp. Blood on the brim. She said nothing after that, just shifted in her seat and looked down at her hands. But her silence was full of something new. Not fear, not pity, something closer to understanding. The ranch had grown quieter with each passing week, but not in a peaceful way. Whispers floated into town about the girl on Boone's land. Some said she was a killer. Others said worse. When Silas rode into town for supplies, eyes followed him from storefronts. Conversations paused mid-sentence. No one said anything to his face, but he heard them. She's hiding something, they'd mutter as he passed. Boone's gone soft. He didn't care. Not about gossip. He'd lived through worse things than small mines. But at night, Liza began to twitch in her sleep. Sometimes she'd cry out without waking, trapped in whatever memory held her. Silas never asked. He only made sure the barn door was latched and the rifle by the stove stayed oiled. It wasn't until the 3rd week that she told him. They were sitting by the fire, the coals burning low, wind sighing against the windows like it had secrets to confess. She hadn't spoken for the better part of an hour. Then softly, I was bought. Silas looked over at her, but said nothing. By a man named Craik. He ran a saloon in Dust Ridge. Didn't care much about age. Just money. Her voice was flat, measured, like someone recounting a ledger. He kept a place behind the brothel for girls he didn't want the customers seeing. I was 12. The fire cracked sharply. She took a sip of coffee and continued. I stayed there for years. Watched what happened to the ones who tried to run. Her jaw tightened. I didn't try. Silas clenched his hand around the mug. What changed? Craik took to talking about me different. Said I was too old now. Said he'd sell me off to the riders. Silas's brow furrowed. Red Fawn riders? She nodded. I ran that night. Took a knife from his belt. Took a coin pouch. Took a beating on the way out. Silas didn't speak. His breath was slow, steady. He looked at her for a long time, then stood, crossed the room, and returned with a revolver wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped it and set it gently on the table in front of her. Ever used one? She stared at the weapon, then up at him. I've watched. Watching ain't shooting that. He slid it toward her, just in case. She picked it up with a strange reverence, the way a preacher might touch a relic. Her fingers wrapped around the grip, and though it was too big for her hand, her aim when she lifted it was steady. That night, as she slept in the loft, Silas sat at the window, pipe in hand, eyes scanning the hills. And he saw it. A lone rider, far off, silhouetted against the moonlit ridge. Just sitting there, watching. No torch, no movement, just the shape of a man on horseback, still as a headstone. By the time Silas reached for his rifle, the figure had turned and disappeared behind the hills. But the chill stayed with him long after the smoke from his pipe went cold. The note was nailed to the barn door with the hunting knife, its steel hissing faintly in the morning breeze. Silas spotted it just after dawn, the paper curled slightly from dew, the ink dark and angry. Hand over the girl, or we burn it all. Red Fawn riders. Skull and crossbones snake. He stared at it for a long time, one hand resting lightly on the knife's hilt, before yanking it free. The symbol, the rattlesnake curling around a fawn, was one he hadn't seen in years. He thought they'd gone quiet, scattered or buried. But now they'd come crawling out of their grave for her. Inside the house, Liza was stirring oats, humming that soft, tuneless melody again. Silas walked in slow, laid the note on the table like it was loaded with gunpowder. She stopped, eyes narrowing at the words, and he saw her body stiffen, breath catch. They found me, she said. Silas didn't ask how. He didn't ask why. He just pulled out a chair and sat. I need the whole truth now, he said. No more shadows. Liza hesitated, then dropped the spoon. She stood silent for a heartbeat, then turned to the window, staring out at the hills like they still held ghosts. I was Craik's girl, she said. Not by choice. He owned Dust Ridge and everything inside it. The girls, the games, the guns. But what people didn't know was he was part of the Riders. The old kind. Not just some drunk gang with horses, real cutthroats. There was gold. Buried deep, somewhere near Red Mesa. I found the map once, locked in his safe. Silas's fingers tapped the table, steady and slow. I stole it, she continued. Burned the saloon to cover my tracks. I figured if they thought it was gone, they'd stop looking. They didn't. She nodded. They never do. He looked at her hard. Do you still have it? No, she said. But they think I do. Outside, a hawk cried, sharp and lonely. Silas rose, folding the letter and sliding it into his coat. Then he poured coffee, handed her a cup. They want you, he said. They'll have to come through me. The days that followed were dry and tight with tension, like the sky itself was holding its breath. Silas rode to the old McLaren farmstead first, found Amos McLaren sharpening a blade out back, one leg missing below the knee, but eyes still sharp enough to slice through lies. Then to the hills where he met Two Stones, a scout from the Lakota who owed Silas for saving his brother during the war. Finally, to an old mining camp where he found Garrick Holt, once a sharpshooter, now living alone with crows and whiskey. They came, not because they believed they'd survive, but because Silas asked. Meanwhile, the ranch began to change. Every window shuttered, every beam reinforced. Liza worked like a soul possessed. She ran drills with Amos, loaded ammo with Two Stones, sparred with Garrick in the dust behind the barn. Her eyes grew darker, steadier. She slept less, ate quick, and kept the rifle close even while washing clothes. Silas built traps near the fence line, spring-loaded spikes hidden under hay, wire that rang bells when tripped. Garrick set up a perch on the windmill with his long-range rifle, sighted for half a mile. They trained at dusk and dawn. Liza practiced drawing, shooting, reloading. Then again, faster. Her aim grew tighter, her grip stronger. One night, she split a knot on a fence post from 40 paces. The men exchanged glances. She didn't smile, just reloaded. But the riders didn't wait long. The first sign came at midnight. A low rumble rolled across the land, like thunder with teeth. Silas was up in an instant, rifle in hand. Liza followed. Through the dark, they saw the gate wide open, cattle gone wild, stampeding in chaos. The corral fence had been slashed. A torch still smoldered near the entrance. Hank, the ranch hand who'd stayed on, was bleeding from the forehead but breathing. Something spooked him bad, he rasped. I heard whistles. Real soft. Too soft to be wind. By morning, half the livestock were missing. A warning. That afternoon, the well turned bitter. Silas tasted it and spat instantly. The water was slick with something foul, kerosene or a lie. A slow poison meant to choke them out, inch by inch. Liza dropped to her knees beside it, fists clenched so tight her knuckles turned bloodless. I know this game, she whispered. They wear you down, make you weak before the knife ever comes. Silas nodded. We ain't weak yet. But they were worn thin, and it got worse that night. An arrow struck Silas just below the knee as he walked to the chicken coop, whistling through the dark like a serpent's kiss. He collapsed, blood soaking his boot, but still managed to crawl behind the trough and return fire. Garrick dragged him inside, teeth clenched around curses. Liza worked fast, tearing strips from a towel, cleaning the wound while Silas gritted against the pain. Clean pass, she muttered. They could have killed you. They didn't want to, he said, jaw tight. They want fear. He winced as she tied off the bandage. They think we'll run. That will give you up. She looked him in the eye then, full and fierce. Would it be easier if I did? Silas didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence said everything. Later, as fire crackled in the hearth and Garrick kept watch from the loft, Silas leaned against the wall, breathing heavy. Liza stood near the window, watching the darkness where the hills met the stars. They're coming, she said quietly, her voice thin as thread. And they're coming soon. The dawn came in red, not the gentle kind that warms the prairie in gold and honey, but a blood-slick sky that seemed to know what was coming. A bitter wind dragged the dust low across the Boone Ranch, whispering over broken fences and the cold barrels of rifles. The house was quiet. The land was not. Liza crouched on the rooftop of the bunkhouse, rifle across her knees, breath steady. Her eyes scanned the ridgeline where the hills dipped like a saddle. Silas lay prone in the barn loft with his old Springfield rested on stacked hay bales. Garrett manned the tower. 2 Stones was in the cellar, waiting for the last line to break. Then the earth began to tremble. Riders, a dozen, maybe more, thundered out of the gulch, black shapes against the rising light. The Red Fong riders. Dust bloomed behind them like war smoke. At the front, a pale horse carried a tall man in a wide-brimmed hat. Rafe Callan, the gang's spine. Liza could see the grin on his face even from where she knelt. He rode like he owned the world. She didn't wait. One sharp breath. One squeeze of the trigger. The first bullet cracked through the morning with surgical intent. A rider pitched sideways, his shoulder exploding in crimson. Another pull, another shot. The second man dropped into the dust, horse screaming as it stumbled. Chaos unfurled instantly. Silas's rifle barked from the barn, dropping a pair of flankers trying to circle left. Garrett picked off a third from the water tower, the echo of his shot cutting sharp through the screams. The riders scrambled, but the front line pushed forward, and that was their mistake. The first of them hit the fence. Hidden charges buried in the posts erupted in fire and shrapnel. Wood smoke and bodies flew. Screams followed. Horses reared, blinded by blood and sound. The line buckled. Then they surged again. Silas rolled to a new perch, reloaded quick. He picked them off like flies on a fence, his old hand steady, his eyes never blinking. But there were too many. Liza slid from the roof and sprinted to the barn. She grabbed her shotgun from behind a feed bin and turned just as the door burst open. Rafe stood there, dust-covered and towering. He smiled like the devil himself had sent him. "Hello, sweetheart." She fired. The blast hit his chest, but he was armored beneath. The pellets scattered harmlessly off a steel plate. He lunged, backhanded the shotgun from her grip, and slammed her into a stall door. Her head snapped sideways. She stumbled, fell. Rafe grabbed her by the hair and yanked her upright. "You thought you could burn my place and vanish? You think you get to walk away with what's mine?" She spat blood in his face. He laughed and shoved her backward into the hay, drawing a revolver. "I liked you better when you were quiet." Before he could fire, the barn wall erupted behind him. Silas barreled through, limping, rifle in one hand, knife in the other. He tackled Rafe with the force of a falling tree, both men crashing into the dirt. The revolver clattered away. They fought like wolves, fists and knees, years of rage crackling between them. But Silas was slower now, older. Rafe rolled him, pulled a hidden pistol from his boot, and fired. The sound was deafening. Silas cried out, clutching his side, blood soaking through his coat. "No!" Liza screamed, diving for the branding iron in the embers of the forge. She grabbed it bare-handed, teeth clenched against the pane, and swung with everything she had. The iron struck Rafe's chest, searing into flesh. He screamed, high and ragged, and she drove it in deeper, twisting. The smell of burned flesh filled the barn. He collapsed. The silence afterward was deafening. The gunfire outside had stopped. The riders were retreating, scattered and screaming, chased off by a fury they hadn't expected. Smoke curled up from the field. Fences were gone. The gate lay in splinters. One of the bunkhouses burned, flames licking the sky. Liza dropped the iron and crawled to Silas. His face was pale, but his eyes were open. "Still got it," he murmured, voice rough. She choked a laugh, sobbed once. "Don't you dare die now." "I ain't. Too damn tired to go." Garrick and 2 Stones found them minutes later. The ranch was a mess of blood and ruin, but they'd won. Somehow, they'd held the line. As the day crawled forward, Silas rested in the house, while the others dug graves. Liza washed the blood from her arms and stared at the flames of the forge. Her skin blistered from the iron's heat. Later, she sat at the table, pulling something from inside her boot, a weathered strip of oilskin. She unwrapped it slowly. Inside, a map drawn in blood and charcoal, corners worn soft by years of hiding. She stared at it for a long moment, then lit a match. The flames danced across it, curling the paper, eating the trail to gold and death. She let it burn to ash. When she turned, Silas was watching her from the doorway, his arm in a sling. "You sure?" he asked. "Gold won't fix anything," she said. "But I've got something better now." He nodded once. "You earned it." That night, as the stars wheeled overhead and the wind cooled the land, Liza sat by the grave of Rafe Callan. She didn't speak. She just watched the firelight flicker across the hills, the smoke rising like a ghost set free. The ranch would never be the same, but neither would she. Silas didn't die. He came close, twice. Fever took him high and hard, and the wound in his side blackened around the edges before it gave in to the poultices Liza brewed from sage and ash bark. He spent days drifting in and out of sleep, whispering names from another life. Mary, Eli, sometimes just numbers, like counting ghosts. But she never left his side. When the sheriff finally arrived, for days too late, and riding with 6 deputies, the smoke had already cleared and the vultures were circling over the ridge. The fence was gone. The porch was scorched. But the gang was gone too, scattered or dead. And Liza stood barefoot in the dust, rifle slung over her shoulder, daring them to question what had happened. The sheriff took off his hat and stared at the bullet holes in the barn, at the blood trails in the dirt. He walked the ground slow, chewing the inside of his cheek. "You held them off better'n a posse ever could," he muttered. "Hell, better'n the cavalry." She said nothing, just watched the horizon, one hand resting on Silas's cane where it leaned against the post. Her face was drawn, but her eyes burned with something older than fear. Word spread fast. Not about the gold. No one spoke of the map or the ashes left in the hearth. But the story of the Red Fong riders meeting their end on Boone land, that passed from saloon to stable, growing longer and louder with each telling. Folks who once whispered about Silas being a fool for keeping a stranger now brought bread and timber. They hammered new boards into the porch, shored up the corral, even replaced the front gate with a thick iron one from an old bank. Liza worked right alongside them, sleeves rolled and sweat painting her brow. When she wasn't fixing fence rails or boiling water, she taught the town's girls to shoot. Not just how to hold a rifle, but how to breathe, how to keep their hands steady when fear tried to make them shake. She showed them how to stitch a wound, how to read the sky, how to stand up straight even when the world tried to make them small. Some of the men scoffed. At first. Then they saw the target split down the middle, the rabbit snared clean, the girls walking with their heads higher than ever before. And they stopped scoffing. Silas recovered slow, grumbling the whole way, but his steps grew stronger with each day. He took to sitting on the porch with a blanket across his legs, carving little animals from spare wood and pretending he wasn't smiling when Liza teased him. She wore Mary's necklace now, a simple silver chain with a small lapis stone, faded from sun and time. Silas had offered it to her one morning without ceremony, holding it out in his calloused palm like he was giving away a piece of the sky. "I think she'd want you to have it," he said. Liza had stared at it a long moment before nodding. No words, just a quiet understanding that went deeper than anything spoken. They weren't married. There was no talk of love in the usual sense. But something bound them, deeper than vows, steadier than passion. Something carved from fire and dust, and the kind of pain you don't come back from unless someone else holds you upright. By the time winter rolled around, the ranch was alive again. The barn was stronger, the house warmer, and the land, scarred but standing, bore signs of spring even beneath the snow. The wind still came hard through the hills, but now it carried stories. Stories of a girl once caught eating spoiled apples meant for pigs. Some said she was a drifter, a thief. Some swore she'd been raised by wolves or banished by the devil himself. Others told quieter tales of a girl who stood with a rifle on her hip and burned an outlaw's name into legend with the iron he meant to mark her with. But the ones who knew, the ones who saw her ride through town, hair loose, boots muddy, eyes sharp as flint, they called her the Queen of Dust.